The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the timber outpost, and Zelda Morgan tumbled out into the February snow wearing nothing but a threadbare cotton dress and slippers better suited for a drawing room in St. Louis than the Colorado mountains. She collapsed immediately, her legs buckling beneath her as the bitter wind sliced through her like a knife. The driver tossed her single carpet bag into the snowbank beside her without ceremony, and before she could even attempt to stand, the coach was already pulling away, its wheels crunching through the fresh powder as it disappeared back down the mountain pass. Zelda tried to call out, but her jaw was clenched so tightly from the cold that only a small whimper escaped her blue-tinged lips. The year was 1876, and Westcliff, Colorado sat at over 7,000 feet in elevation. February here was unforgiving, brutal, a force of nature that could kill a person in hours if they were unprepared. Zelda had been told it would be cold, but nothing in her 22 years of comfortable city living had prepared her for this bone-deep chill that seemed to freeze the very blood in her veins. She had come west to escape scandal, to start fresh as a schoolteacher in a place where nobody knew her name or her family's sudden fall from grace. Her father's business partner had absconded with everything, leaving the Morgan family destitute and Zelda's engagement broken when her betrothed decided poverty was not becoming on a wife. The teaching position had seemed like providence, an answer to desperate prayers. Now, shivering in the snow, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Zelda tried to stand again, but her feet had already gone numb. She managed to get to her knees, reaching for her carpet bag, when she heard heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. She looked up, squinting against the bright white glare, and saw him. The man approaching was enormous, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. He wore thick furs and leather, his dark hair hanging past his collar, and his face was obscured by a full beard. But what struck her most were his eyes, a startling blue-green like the mountain lake she had glimpsed from the stage-coach window. Those eyes widened when they saw her. "Good God," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "What fool left you out here like this?" Before Zelda could answer, he was already shrugging off his heavy fur coat. He draped it around her shoulders, and the warmth trapped in the fabric was so intense she nearly wept. He lifted her effortlessly from the snow, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back, and grabbed her carpet bag with his free hand. "I can walk," Zelda managed to say through chattering teeth. "No, you cannot," he said simply, and started striding toward the timber building she had noticed when the coach stopped. "Your lips are turning purple. How long were you out here?" "Just a few minutes. The stage just left." He made a sound of disgust. "That would be Pete Dawson. Man is so set on keeping his schedule, he would leave a woman to freeze rather than wait 5 minutes to see her settled." The building he carried her into was a trading post and general store combined. A pot-bellied stove in the center radiated blessed heat, and Zelda felt pins and needles erupting in her fingers and toes as he set her down in a chair directly beside it. He kept his fur coat wrapped around her and immediately began stoking the fire, adding more wood until the flames leaped higher. "What brings you to Westcliff?" he asked, not looking at her as he worked. "And in February of all the forsaken times." "I am the new schoolteacher," Zelda said, leaning toward the stove. "Zelda Morgan. I was told there would be someone here to meet me." He straightened, his impressive height even more apparent in the enclosed space. His shoulders strained against the heavy wool shirt he wore, and she could see the outline of powerful muscles in his arms and chest. This was a man built for surviving in harsh places, every inch of him strong and capable. "Teacher," he frowned. "Nobody told me about a teacher arriving. I am Jude Zimmerman." I run the timber operation up the mountain, but I also handle most of the supply runs and communications for Westcliff. If someone was supposed to meet you, I would know about it." Zelda felt her heart sink. "But I sent 3 letters confirming my arrival date. The school board wrote back and said everything was arranged." Jude crossed to the counter and rifled through a stack of papers and envelopes. He pulled out several letters, his frown deepening as he read. "These are all from the past 2 weeks. Looks like your letters got held up in Denver because of the snow. The passes were closed for nearly a month." "Oh no," Zelda whispered. The warmth from the fire was finally reaching her core, but a different kind of cold was settling in her stomach. "What am I supposed to do?" "The schoolhouse is not prepared for living," Jude said, still reading through the correspondence. "Says here you were meant to board with the Hendersons, but they left for Kansas 3 days ago. Mrs. Henderson's mother took ill, and they do not expect to be back until spring." Zelda closed her eyes. This could not be happening. She had spent her last dollar on the stagecoach fare. She had nowhere to go, no way to get back even if she wanted to. "Are there any other families in town who might take a boarder?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Jude set down the letters and looked at her properly for the first time. His gaze was direct but not unkind, and she saw him taking in her inappropriate clothing, her thin frame, the dark circles under her eyes from days of uncomfortable travel. "Westcliff is not much of a town yet," he said carefully. "There are maybe 40 people living in the valley year-round. Most are miners or loggers, single men. The few families we have are struggling themselves. Adding another mouth to feed through the winter would be a hardship." "I see." Zelda straightened her spine, drawing on the pride that had sustained her through her family's financial collapse. "Then I will make do at the schoolhouse. If you could direct me there, I would be grateful." "You would be dead by morning," Jude said bluntly. "The schoolhouse has a stove but no wood stockpiled, no supplies. The windows are not properly sealed. You would freeze before you could get a proper fire going, especially dressed like that." He gestured at her inadequate clothing. "Did you not bring anything warmer?" "This is the warmest dress I own," Zelda admitted. "We sold everything before I left St. Louis. I thought I could purchase suitable clothing when I arrived, but the stagecoach depot in Denver told me there would not be another coach to Westcliff for days. I spent the last of my money buying food for the journey. I planned to use my first month's salary to buy what I needed." Jude was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those striking eyes. She saw the exact moment he made his decision, watched his jaw set with determination. "You will stay with me," he said. Zelda's eyes widened. "Sir, I could not possibly. That would be entirely inappropriate." "I live in a cabin about 2 miles up the mountain," Jude continued as if she had not spoken. "It is warm, well supplied, and has a separate sleeping area I do not use. You can have privacy and safety until we can make proper arrangements. Maybe by then the Hendersons will return, or we can send word to the other settlements and find you suitable lodging. Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate your kindness, but surely you understand why I cannot accept such an offer." Your reputation will not matter much if you are dead," he interrupted, his voice firm but not harsh. "Miss Morgan, I understand your concern, but this is the reality of the situation. You have 3 choices. You can try to stay at the schoolhouse and likely freeze to death. You can impose on one of the struggling families here and watch their children go hungrier so you can eat. Or you can accept my help, stay alive and warm, and begin teaching those same children once the school is ready." Zelda stared at him. Everything in her upbringing screamed that this was improper, dangerous, scandalous. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man was simply not done. But as she looked at Jude Zimmerman, At his earnest expression and the genuine concern in his eyes, she felt something shift inside her. This was not St. Louis. This was the Colorado mountains in February, and the rules she had always lived by suddenly seemed far less important than survival. "I would pay you back," she said quietly. "Once I receive my salary, I would reimburse you for any expense." "We can discuss that later," Jude said. "Right now, we need to get you properly clothed before we head up the mountain. The trading post has some women's items. They might not be fashionable, but they will keep you alive." He moved behind the counter with the ease of someone familiar with the space, pulling out various items. Thick wool stockings, heavy canvas trousers, a flannel shirt, a wool sweater, sturdy leather boots lined with fur, and another coat, not as heavy as his own but far warmer than anything Zelda had ever worn. "The privy is out back, but there is a small room behind that curtain where you can change," he said, nodding toward a corner of the store. "Put on as many layers as you can manage. We have a bit of a walk ahead of us." Zelda took the clothing, her hands still trembling slightly from the cold and from the enormity of what she was agreeing to. Behind the curtain, she stripped off her wet dress and undergarments, gasping as the air hit her bare skin. She dressed quickly, marveling at the strange feel of trousers against her legs. She had never worn men's clothing before, but the practicality was immediately apparent. The layers of wool and flannel trapped heat close to her body, and by the time she pulled on the fur-lined boots, she actually felt warm for the first time since leaving Denver. When she emerged, Jude nodded in approval. "Better. How do the boots fit?" "A bit large, but with the thick stockings, they feel secure enough." "Good." He had packed several bags while she was changing, and now he shouldered them with ease, the muscles in his back and shoulders flexing beneath his shirt. "Stay close to me." The path is well traveled, but with fresh snow, it can be hard to see where to step. He handed her a walking stick, a sturdy piece of wood worn smooth by use, and led her out into the cold. Zelda had thought she was warm now, but the mountain wind cut through even her new layers, making her gasp. Jude immediately moved to her windward side, blocking the worst of the gusts with his larger frame. "It gets easier once we are in the trees," he said. They walked in silence for a while, Zelda concentrating on placing her feet where Jude's feet had just been, following his trail through the deepening snow. The landscape was breathtaking even through her discomfort, all white peaks and dark evergreens, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. She had never seen anything like it in the city. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the burning in her legs as they climbed. "For years," Jude said. "I came out from Pennsylvania after the war. Needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could work with my hands and not think too much." There was a weight in those words, a history Zelda recognized. Many men had come west after the war, seeking to escape memories of things they had seen and done. She did not pry. "You live alone all the time." "I prefer it," he said simply. "I have men who work for me during the logging season, and I go into town when I need supplies or company, but mostly, yes, I am alone. It suits me." "Do you not get lonely?" He glanced back at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. "Sometimes. But there are different kinds of loneliness. This kind I can manage." Zelda understood that too. She had been lonely in St. Louis, surrounded by people who had suddenly turned their backs on her family. Sometimes isolation was better than false friendship. They entered the tree line, and as Jude had promised, the wind died down. The forest was eerily quiet, just the sound of their footsteps crunching through snow and the occasional call of a bird. The path became steeper, and Jude slowed his pace to accommodate her shorter legs and lack of mountain fitness. "Not much farther," he said encouragingly. You are doing well for a city woman." "I am tougher than I look," Zelda replied, and was rewarded with what might have been a smile beneath his beard. When the cabin finally came into view, Zelda felt a rush of relief so strong it made her dizzy. It was larger than she expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney from which smoke was rising. Jude must have left a fire burning when he went down to the trading post. "You left it unattended?" she asked, surprised. "The firebox is secure, and I banked it before I left." "It will be warm inside, not hot, but we will fix that quickly enough." He was right. When he opened the heavy door and ushered her inside, the air was blessedly warm compared to outside. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above, accessed by a sturdy ladder. The main floor had a massive stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and various shelves and storage. Furs and blankets were piled on a long bench, and snowshoes and tools hung on the walls. "The loft is warmer since heat rises," Jude said, setting down his bags and immediately moving to build up the fire. "I will sleep down here. You can have the bed up there. It is private and there is a curtain you can draw." Zelda climbed the ladder to look. The loft was cozy, with a real bed piled high with furs and blankets, a small table with a lamp and a trunk for storage. The curtain he had mentioned could be tied closed, creating a completely separate space. "This is very generous," she said, climbing back down. "Mr. Zimmerman, I want you to know I appreciate this more than I can say. I will try not to be any trouble." "Call me Jude," he said, coaxing the fire into roaring life. "And you will not be trouble if you follow a few rules. The most important is about the fire. It cannot ever go out, do you understand? In weather like this, if the fire goes out and we cannot get it relit quickly, we could both freeze before morning." "I understand," Zelda said seriously. "I keep wood stocked here by the fireplace, but the main supply is in the lean-to outside. Part of daily living here is making sure we have enough split and stacked inside to last the night. I will handle that, but I need you to keep the fire fed during the day when I am working." "I can do that. The stove is for cooking. I have supplies, basic stuff, but I am not much of a cook." "If you can manage that, I would be grateful." "I can cook," Zelda assured him. Her mother had insisted all her daughters learn, despite their social standing. Now she was grateful for that practicality. "Water comes from the spring about 50 yards that way," he pointed. "I keep a path cleared and the spring does not freeze because it comes up warm from underground. But you never go out there alone, especially not in a storm. If you need water and I am not here, you wait. We keep enough stored inside for a day or two." The litany of survival rules continued. Do not go outside without telling him. Do not wander off the cleared paths. Keep the shutters closed at night to hold in heat. Ration the lamp oil. Watch for signs of frostbite. The list was daunting, but Zelda listened carefully, committing each point to memory. "I know it seems like a lot," Jude said, reading her expression. "But once you get used to the routine, it becomes second nature." "How do you manage all this and run a timber operation?" Zelda asked. "The operation is shut down for the winter. Too dangerous to log when the snow is this deep, and we cannot move the timber out anyway. Come spring, I will hire a crew and we will work until the first snows next year. Right now, my job is just maintenance and survival." He showed her where everything was stored, explained his system for organizing supplies, and taught her how to adjust the dampers on both the fireplace and the stove. By the time he was finished, the cabin was thoroughly warm and Zelda felt her body finally relaxing from the constant tension of being cold. "You should eat something," Jude said. "Then rest. You have had a long journey." "Let me cook," Zelda offered. "Please. I want to be useful, not just a burden." He looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded. "There is salt pork in the cold box outside, potatoes in the bin there, and onions hanging by the door. I have dried beans if you want to start some soaking for tomorrow." Zelda set to work, finding a strange comfort in the familiar tasks of peeling and chopping. Jude sat at the table, cleaning and oiling his tools, the two of them working in companionable silence. It was oddly domestic, peaceful in a way Zelda had not expected. She made a simple stew, using the supplies Jude had indicated and adding some dried herbs she found in his stores. When she tasted it, she was pleased with the result, savory and filling, perfect for a cold mountain evening. "It is ready," she said, and Jude put aside his work. They sat together at the table, and Zelda watched as Jude took his first bite. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked at her with something like surprise. "This is good," he said. "Really good." "You sound shocked," Zelda said, amused despite herself. "I have been eating my own cooking for 4 years," Jude replied. "This is like a feast in comparison." They ate together, and Zelda found herself studying her host. He had pushed his hair back from his face, revealing strong features, a straight nose and those remarkable eyes. There was a scar along his jawline, mostly hidden by his beard, and his hands were rough and scarred from hard work. He was handsome in a rugged way, nothing like the refined gentleman she had known in St. Louis, but striking nonetheless. "May I ask you something?" Zelda said. "Go ahead." "Why did you help me? You do not know me. I could be anyone." Jude set down his spoon and met her eyes. "I was not always a mountain man," he said quietly. "I grew up in a good family, went to school, learned manners and proper behavior. Then the war came and I learned different things. I learned that the rules of civilized society sometimes matter less than simple human decency. I learned that when you see someone in need, you help them, period. Not because it is proper or expected, but because it is right." There was a depth of conviction in his words that made Zelda's throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome," Jude said simply, and returned to his meal. After dinner, Jude insisted on cleaning up while Zelda climbed to the loft. She was exhausted, her body aching from travel and cold and the stress of the day. The bed was more comfortable than she had imagined, the furs and blankets creating a warm cocoon. Below, she could hear Jude moving around, the crackle of the fire, the settling sounds of the cabin. She should have been afraid, alone in the wilderness with a strange man. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. There was something solid and trustworthy about Jude Zimmerman, something that made her instincts say she could rely on him. As she drifted off to sleep, warm for the first time in days, she found herself thinking that perhaps her journey to Westcliff had not been a mistake after all. Zelda woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of wood being split. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the shutters, and for a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned and she sat up, pushing back the heavy furs. The cabin was already warm, the fire built up to a cheerful blaze. Through the window, she could see Jude outside in the early morning light, swinging an axe with practiced ease. Even from here, she could see the power in his movements, the way his muscles flexed with each swing. He had removed his coat despite the cold, working in just his shirt, and she found herself watching perhaps longer than was proper. Zelda climbed down from the loft, finger combing her hair and trying to make herself presentable. She had slept in the flannel shirt and wool stockings, not having a proper nightgown with her. Her carpetbag had contained mainly her few remaining books and personal items, not much in the way of practical clothing. The coffee pot sat on the stove, and she poured herself a cup, grateful for the warmth and the bitter, energizing taste. She was just considering what to make for breakfast when Jude came in, carrying an armload of split wood. "Good morning," he said, his breath fogging in the air that rushed in with him. "Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks," Zelda admitted. "Thank you for the coffee." "There is oatmeal in the jar there," Jude said, stacking the wood neatly by the fireplace. "And I brought in some eggs from the cold box. I have chickens in a coop out back. They do not lay much in winter, but we get a few." "You have chickens up here?" Zelda was impressed. "Chickens and 2 goats for milk." "I built them a shelter attached to the cabin so I can tend them without going outside in bad weather. They help keep me from getting scurvy, give me something living to talk to besides myself." Zelda smiled at that. "I will make breakfast. It is the least I can do." She prepared oatmeal with dried apples and cinnamon, scrambled eggs with bits of salt pork, and more coffee. Jude watched her work with an expression she could not quite read, something between appreciation and puzzlement. "What is it?" she finally asked. "I am just thinking how strange it is to have someone else in my space," he said honestly. "Not bad strange, just different. I had forgotten what it was like to have company." They ate breakfast together, and afterward, Jude explained his plans for the day. He needed to check his trap lines, which would take most of the morning, and then he wanted to go down to the trading post to send word to the surrounding settlements about Zelda's situation. "I do not like leaving you alone so soon," he said, "but I need to get the word out. Maybe one of the other towns has a family willing to take you in." Zelda felt an unexpected pang at those words. She had been here less than a day, but the thought of leaving already felt wrong somehow. Still, she knew it was the right thing to do. She could not stay here indefinitely, alone with Jude. People would talk, and she would lose any chance of being respected as the school teacher. "I understand," she said. "What should I do while you are gone?" "Keep the fire fed," Jude said. "There are books on the shelf if you want to read. Do not go outside. I will be back before dark, but if something happens and I am delayed, do not panic. There is enough wood and food here to last weeks." "Be careful," Zelda said, and meant it. Jude looked at her, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made her heart skip. Then he nodded, pulled on his heavy coat, and headed out into the cold. Alone in the cabin, Zelda took stock of her new reality. She kept the fire burning as instructed, added wood every hour or so, and used the time to explore her temporary home more thoroughly. Jude's books were a revelation. She had expected perhaps a Bible and maybe a farmer's almanac, but his collection was extensive and eclectic. Poetry, philosophy, novels, histories, all well-worn and clearly read many times. She pulled down a volume of Wordsworth and settled by the fire, losing herself in verse about nature and solitude. It was easy to see why these poems would appeal to someone living as Jude did, alone on a mountain, finding peace in the wild places. The day passed slowly but not unpleasantly. Zelda tended the fire, prepared beans and bacon for dinner, and read until her eyes grew tired. As the light began to fade, she found herself watching the door anxiously, listening for Jude's return. When he finally came in, stamping snow from his boots, she felt a rush of relief so strong it startled her. "Any trouble?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "None at all." "How did your errands go?" Jude's expression was grim. "Not as well as I hoped. I sent word to the settlements, but the responses I got back were not encouraging. Everyone is struggling through the winter. Nobody has room for another person." "Oh," Zelda said quietly. "There is one possibility," Jude continued. "There is a ranch about 20 miles south near Cotopaxi. The family there, the Shepherds, they have a large house and several daughters. I sent a message asking if they might take you on as a governess or companion. It would not be teaching in a school, but it would be respectable work and proper housing." "That is very thoughtful," Zelda said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Thank you. The problem is the passes, Jude said, moving to warm himself by the fire. There is another storm coming in tonight, a big one. It could be weeks before anyone can get through to deliver my message or bring back a response. So I am stuck here, Zelda said. For now, yes, Jude met her eyes. I am sorry. I know this is not what you wanted. You have been nothing but kind, Zelda said firmly. I am grateful, truly. I just worry about the impropriety, about what people will say. Let them say what they want, Jude said with a flash of anger. You would be dead if I had not taken you in. Anyone with sense will understand that. His vehemence surprised her but also warmed her. It had been a long time since anyone had defended her so fiercely. The storm Jude had predicted hit that night with a vengeance. Zelda lay in her loft, listening to the wind howl and the snow pelt against the shutters. It sounded like the whole mountain was screaming. She tried not to be afraid, but every gust made the cabin shudder and she found herself gripping the furs tightly. Miss Morgan, Jude's voice came from below. Are you all right? Yes, she called back, not entirely truthfully. This is a bad one, but the cabin has weathered worse. We are safe here. His calm confidence helped settle her nerves. She finally fell into an uneasy sleep, waking several times to the sound of the storm but finding comfort in knowing Jude was there, keeping watch, keeping the fire burning. By morning, the world had transformed. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, and when Jude forced the door open, Zelda saw white as far as the eye could see, the familiar landscape buried under feet of fresh powder. We are snowed in proper now, Jude said, surveying the scene. It will take me hours just to dig out paths to the animals and the woodpile. Let me help, Zelda said. You do not know how. Then teach me. Jude looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but you do exactly as I say. The cold out there can kill you faster than you think. He bundled her up in every layer she owned, wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed, and made her wear thick gloves lined with fur. Then he handed her a shovel. We will work in shifts, he said. 20 minutes out, then 20 minutes in to warm up. Watch your fingers and toes. If they start to hurt, we come in immediately. They worked together, Jude clearing the main paths while Zelda helped carry snow away from the door and windows. It was brutal, exhausting work, and Zelda quickly learned why Jude had such impressive muscles. Living here meant constant physical labor just to survive. After the third shift outside, Zelda collapsed by the fire, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and cold. Jude quickly made her tea with honey, pressed the warm cup into her hands, and made her drink it all before he would let her rest. You did well, he said, approval in his voice. Most city folk would have given up after the first shift. I told you I was tougher than I look, Zelda managed through chattering teeth. Over the following days, they settled into a routine. Jude would wake before dawn, build up the fire, and tend to the animals. Zelda would make breakfast, then they would work together on whatever the day's survival tasks required. Wood chopping, snow clearing, ice breaking, food preparation, all the endless chores that kept them alive and warm. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Zelda learned about Jude's childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, his decision to come west. He had seen terrible things, lost friends and brothers in arms, and come to the mountains to heal in the quiet and the solitude. Jude, in turn, learned about Zelda's life in St. Louis, her family's fall from grace, her broken engagement to a man who had claimed to love her but abandoned her the moment money became an issue. He was a coward, Jude said bluntly when she told him. He was practical, Zelda said, though without much conviction. Love is not supposed to be practical. It is supposed to be loyal. When you commit to someone, you stand by them through good times and bad. That is the whole point. There was such certainty in his voice, such conviction, that Zelda found herself believing him. Maybe she had been foolish to think she had loved Gerald at all. What she had felt for him seemed pale and weak compared to the fierce loyalty Jude described. As the days turned into weeks, Zelda found herself watching Jude more and more. She noticed the gentle way he handled the animals, the patience with which he explained things to her, the way he always made sure she was warm and fed before seeing to his own needs. She noticed the strength in his hands and the kindness in his eyes, the way his rare smiles transformed his whole face. She also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, a hunger in his gaze that had nothing to do with food. It should have frightened her, but instead it made something warm unfurl in her chest. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Jude was carving something from a piece of wood, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy, while Zelda mended a tear in his shirt. It was a domestic scene, comfortable and familiar, and Zelda realized with a start that she was happy. Truly happy, perhaps for the first time in her life. "Jude," she said softly. What are you carving?" He held it up, and she saw it was a bird, wings spread in flight. The detail was exquisite, each feather carefully rendered. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "It is for you," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I thought you might like something to remind you that spring will come. The birds always return." Zelda took the carving, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. I will treasure it." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Then Jude spoke, his voice rough. "Zelda, I need to say something, and I need you to just listen until I am done." Her heart began to pound. "All right. When you leave here, when the snow clears and you go to that ranch or back to teaching, I am going to miss you more than I can say. These weeks with you have been the best I have had since I came to this mountain. You have made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. You have made me remember what it is like to have someone to talk to care for, to share my life with." He paused, his jaw working as he gathered his thoughts. "I know I am not the kind of man you are used to. I am rough and uneducated compared to city gentlemen. I live a hard life in a hard place. But I want you to know that if you ever wanted to stay, if you ever thought you could be happy here with me, I would do everything in my power to make you so. I would build you anything you wanted, take you anywhere you needed to go, give you everything I have." Zelda's hands were shaking. "Jude, are you saying—" "I am saying I have fallen in love with you," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "I know it is too soon. I know it is probably just the circumstances, but I cannot help how I feel. You are brave and strong and kind, and you make me want to be a better man. If you do not feel the same, I understand, and we will never speak of it again. But I had to tell you. I could not let you leave without telling you." Zelda set down her mending with trembling hands. She stood, crossed to where Jude sat, and knelt in front of him so they were at eye level. "You think it is too soon," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You think it is just circumstances. Jude, I have spent weeks watching you keep me alive, watching you sacrifice your comfort and privacy to give me safety. I have seen your kindness, your strength, your gentleness. I have heard your stories and your dreams. How could I not fall in love with you?" His eyes widened. "You love me. I love you," she said clearly. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I do not want to go to that ranch. I do not want to leave this cabin. I want to stay here with you if you truly want me." Jude reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large, rough hands. "I want you more than I have ever wanted anything," he said, and then he kissed her. It was not Zelda's first kiss. Gerald had kissed her, chaste pecks that had left her unmoved. But this was entirely different. Jude kissed her like she was precious and necessary, like she was air and water and warmth all in one. His lips were gentle but insistent, and when she opened to him, deepening the kiss, he made a sound low in his throat that sent heat racing through her veins. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jude rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "We will do it proper, get a preacher when the snow clears, but marry me, Zelda, stay with me always." "Yes," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans and stealing kisses, giddy with the joy of newfound love. Jude promised to build her a bigger cabin, one with a real kitchen and a separate bedroom and glass windows. Zelda promised to help him with the timber operation, to keep his books and manage the business side of things. They talked about children, about growing old together on this mountain, about building a life that was theirs alone. That night, Zelda climbed to the loft as usual, but she did so with a light heart and dreams full of promise. Below, she could hear Jude moving around, banking the fire for the night, and she smiled into the darkness. The next weeks passed in a haze of happiness. Jude and Zelda were careful to maintain propriety, sleeping separately and keeping their physical affection to kisses and hand-holding, but the emotional intimacy between them grew deeper every day. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. Jude taught Zelda to shoot, to set traps, to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the animals. Zelda taught Jude to cook properly, to appreciate poetry, to see beauty in small domestic moments. They were teaching each other how to live, really live, not just survive. One morning in early April, Zelda woke to a strange sound. She lay still, trying to identify it, and then realized with a start that it was dripping. The snow was melting. She rushed to the window and threw open the shutters. The world outside was transformed. The drifts were shrinking visibly, water running in rivulets down the mountainside. Patches of brown earth showed through the white, and in the distance she could hear the rush of the creek, swollen with snowmelt. "Jude," she called down. "Come look." He climbed up to the loft, something he had never done before, and joined her at the window. His presence in the small space made her pulse quicken, but she focused on the view outside. "Spring is coming," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "A few more weeks and the passes will be clear enough for travel. Then we can find a preacher," Zelda said, leaning into his solid warmth. "Then we can find a preacher," he agreed. They stood together, watching the world wake up from winter, and Zelda felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be. Not in St. Louis living a constrained, proper life, but here in the wild Colorado mountains with a man who loved her fiercely and completely. As the snow continued to melt, Jude began preparing for the timber season. He needed to go down to Westcliff to hire his crew and arrange for equipment. It would be his first trip away from the cabin since Zelda had arrived, and both of them were apprehensive about the separation. "Come with me," Jude said the night before he planned to leave. "I want people to meet you properly as my intended wife." Zelda hesitated. She knew there would be talk, probably unkind talk, about her winter alone with Jude, but she also knew that hiding would only make things worse. "All right," she said. "I will come." They made the trip down the mountain together, the path muddy with snowmelt but passable. As they approached Westcliff, Zelda felt her anxiety mounting. How would people react? Would they shun her? Refuse to accept her as Jude's wife? The trading post was the first stop, and when they entered, the proprietor, a weathered man named Sam, looked up with surprise. "Jude, and Miss Morgan, we had wondered if you made it through the winter all right." "We did fine," Jude said, his hand possessively on Zelda's back. "Better than fine, actually. Sam, I want you to be the first to know that Miss Morgan has agreed to be my wife. We will be married as soon as we can get a circuit preacher up here." Sam's eyebrows shot up, but then a grin split his face. "Well, I will be. Congratulations to you both." "That is fine news indeed." Other people began to gather, drawn by the commotion, and Jude repeated his announcement. To Zelda's relief and surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. The few families with children were particularly pleased, eager to know when she would start teaching. The single men congratulated Jude with varying degrees of envy, and the other women, though there were only a handful, welcomed Zelda warmly. "We are just glad someone is willing to make an honest man of this hermit," one older woman said with a laugh. "Been telling him for years he needed a wife." There was some gossip, of course, whispered comments about propriety and hasty engagements, but nothing as bad as Zelda had feared. Most people seemed to understand the reality of mountain life, that survival sometimes required bending the usual rules. They spent 2 days in Westcliff, during which Jude hired his logging crew and arranged for supplies. Zelda met with the makeshift school board and agreed to start teaching once the new schoolhouse was completed, likely in the fall. In the meantime, she could tutor children privately if their parents could bring them up to the cabin. The biggest news came from Sam at the trading post. A circuit preacher was expected to pass through in 3 weeks, making his spring rounds of the mountain communities. "If you want, I can ask him to stay an extra day to perform a wedding," Sam offered. Jude looked at Zelda, his eyes asking the question. She nodded, her heart full. "Yes," Jude said. "Please ask him." They returned to the cabin with renewed purpose. 3 weeks was not much time to prepare for a wedding, even a simple mountain wedding. Zelda had no dress, no flowers, no family to invite. But she found she did not care about any of that. All that mattered was Jude and the life they would build together. Jude, however, seemed determined to make the day special for her. He spent his evenings carving furniture, beautiful pieces that would grace their future larger cabin. He ordered fabric from the trading post, yards of soft cream-colored wool, and asked one of the women in town to make a dress for Zelda. "You do not have to do all this," Zelda protested, though she was touched by his efforts. "I want to," Jude said firmly. "You deserve a real wedding, Zelda. You deserve to feel beautiful and celebrated. Let me give you that." How could she argue with such heartfelt desire to please her? She let him fuss, let him plan, and found herself falling even more deeply in love with this rough mountain man who had such a tender heart. The night before the wedding, Jude insisted on sleeping outside in his temporary camp with the logging crew, which had arrived 2 days earlier. "I am not supposed to see you before the wedding," he said. "I know we have been living together, but I want to do this part right." Zelda kissed him goodbye, marveling at this unexpected traditionalism. She spent the night alone in the cabin, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a disgraced socialite, her future bleak and uncertain. Now she was about to marry a man she loved with her whole heart, about to start a life that was nothing like what she had planned, but everything she had not known she needed. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect Colorado spring day. The women of Westcliff arrived early to help Zelda prepare, bringing wildflowers they had gathered and the dress they had made. When Zelda slipped it on, she gasped. It was simple but beautiful, the cream wool soft against her skin, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "You look lovely," one of the women said, adjusting the fall of the skirt. "Jude is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Zelda said softly. The ceremony was held outside, in a clearing near the cabin that Jude had laboriously cleared of brush and rocks. Someone had brought benches, and the small community of Westcliff turned out to witness the union. It was nothing like the grand society wedding Zelda had once imagined for herself, and it was infinitely better, When Jude emerged from the cabin where he had been dressing, Zelda's breath caught. He had trimmed his beard and pulled his hair back, and he wore a proper suit that must have cost him dearly. He looked handsome and nervous and so full of love that Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. The preacher, an elderly man with kind eyes, kept the ceremony simple. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other through all the seasons of life, through cold winters and warm summers, through hardship and joy. When Jude slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band he had ordered from Denver, Zelda felt the weight of it like a promise, like an anchor tying her to this place and this man. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said. "Young man, you may kiss your bride." Jude cupped Zelda's face in his hands, just as he had that first night they had confessed their love, and kissed her tenderly. The small crowd cheered, and Zelda felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne. The celebration afterward was simple but heartfelt. Someone had brought venison, someone else had made bread, and there was even a small cake, dense and sweet with honey. The loggers produced instruments, a fiddle and a harmonica, and there was dancing and singing as the sun set over the mountains. Jude and Zelda danced together, swaying to the music under the emerging stars, and Zelda thought she had never been happier in her entire life. When the guests finally departed, heading back down to Westcliff with torches to light their way, Jude and Zelda were left alone. Jude banked the fire, checked the shutters, and then held out his hand to Zelda. "Come with me, wife," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Zelda took his hand, and he led her to the loft. He had transformed it while she was getting ready that morning, covering the bed with fresh furs and wildflowers, lighting candles that cast a soft glow over everything. "Jude," Zelda breathed. "It is beautiful." "You are beautiful," he said, pulling her close. "I cannot believe you are really mine." "I am yours," Zelda said, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "And you are mine, always." They came together with a mix of tenderness and passion, learning each other in new and intimate ways. Jude was gentle, patient, making sure Zelda felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally lay tangled together, sated and happy, Zelda felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," Jude said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for choosing this life. Thank you for choosing me." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Zelda said, and meant it with her whole heart. The months that followed were full of hard work and happiness. Jude's logging operation was successful, the timber fetching good prices, and Zelda kept the books and managed the household. When fall came, the new schoolhouse was finished, and Zelda began teaching the children of Westcliff, riding down the mountain 3 days a week while Jude worked. They also began building their new cabin, a larger structure with real windows and separate rooms. Jude and his crew worked on it whenever the timber operation allowed, and by the time the first snows fell again, it was ready. They moved in together, marveling at the luxury of space and light. That first winter in the new cabin, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Jude on Christmas Eve, presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties she had made in secret. Jude stared at the booties, then at her, his eyes wide with wonder. "A baby." "A baby," Zelda confirmed, laughing as he swept her into his arms and spun her around. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down carefully as if she might break. "Zelda, this is the best gift you could ever give me." Their son was born in late summer, a healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him James, and Jude cried when he held him for the first time, this rough mountain man reduced to tears by the miracle of new life. Zelda watched her husband cradle their son, and felt her heart swell with love. She thought about the frightened young woman who had tumbled out of a stagecoach into the snow, cold and alone and uncertain of her future. That woman would never have believed she could be this happy, this loved, this complete. Over the years that followed, their family grew. 2 more children came, a daughter they named Lily, and another son they called Thomas. The cabin grew too, expanding to accommodate their growing brood. Jude's timber operation prospered, and Zelda continued to teach, raising her own children alongside the children of Westcliff. Through it all, through the joys and the sorrows, the good years and the lean years, Jude kept his promise. He kept the fire burning. He kept Zelda warm, not just physically but emotionally, spiritually, in every way that mattered. His love was a constant, fierce and protective and tender all at once. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the clear mountain air. "You ever regret it?" Jude asked, taking Zelda's hand. "Giving up the chance for a different life, an easier life?" Zelda looked at him, at his dear face with the lines that time and sun had carved around his eyes, at the silver threading through his dark hair. She thought about the life she might have had, married to Gerald or someone like him, living in polite society, probably miserable and unfulfilled. "Never," she said firmly. "This is exactly the life I was meant to live. You are exactly the man I was meant to love. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Jude lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I thank God every day for that snowstorm that brought you to me." "And I thank God for you," Zelda said, "for your kindness to a stranger, for your love, for the life you have given me." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. The fire crackled inside the cabin, warm and welcoming, always burning, just as Jude had promised all those years ago. And Zelda, who had arrived unable to bear the cold, found herself warmed not just by the flames but by the enduring heat of a love that would last a lifetime. 20 years after that fateful February day, Zelda stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Jude teach their grandchildren to split wood. Their children had grown and married, and now the next generation was learning the skills needed to survive in the mountains. James and his wife lived nearby, running the timber operation with his father. Lily had married a rancher and lived in the valley, but visited often. Thomas, their youngest, was training to be a doctor in Denver but came home every summer. Jude looked up and caught her watching. Even after all these years, his smile still made her heart skip a beat. He set down his axe and walked over to her, pulling her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how different my life might have been," Zelda said. "How close I came to missing all of this." "Fate brought you to me," Jude said with certainty. "You were always meant to be here, Zelda. This was always your home." She leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth that had sustained her through countless winters. He was right. This mountain, this man, this life, it had all been waiting for her. She had just needed a snowstorm and a leap of faith to find it. "Come inside," she said, taking his hand. "I made stew and the bread is almost ready." They walked into the cabin together, into the warmth and the light, surrounded by family and love. The fire burned bright in the hearth, as it always did, as it always would, a symbol of the promise Jude had made all those years ago and had never once broken. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Zelda traced the familiar lines of Jude's face, memorizing features she knew as well as her own. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Jude said, pulling her closer. "Forever and always." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the mountain in white. But inside, the fire burned warm and bright, and Zelda felt no fear of the cold. She never would again. Jude had made sure of that from the very beginning, and he would continue to do so for all the days of their lives. As she drifted off to sleep, safe and warm in her husband's arms, Zelda smiled. She had come to Colorado as a desperate woman with no prospects, fleeing scandal and searching for a new start. She had found so much more than that. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found love that would endure through all seasons, as constant and necessary as the fire that burned in their hearth. The mountain man had kept his promise. He had kept the fire burning. He had kept her warm always. And in doing so, he had given her not just survival, but a life rich with meaning, joy, and a love that would echo through generations. Their story became legend in Westcliff, passed down through the years as an example of how love could bloom in the most unexpected places, how strength could be found in gentleness, how a stranger's kindness could change the course of a life. Children heard the tale of the city woman who came to the mountains in winter and the lonely logger who saved her. And they learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of compassion. And every winter, when the snow fell deep and the wind howled around the cabins of Westcliff, people would bank their fires high and remember Jude and Zelda Zimmerman, and the love that had warmed them through the coldest seasons of their lives. The fire always burned in the Zimmerman cabin, a beacon of warmth and welcome, just as it had from that very first day when a freezing woman had been carried inside and given not just shelter, but a future full of love. Years turned into decades, and still Jude and Zelda remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with time rather than fading. When Jude's hair turned completely silver and his back began to ache from years of hard labor, Zelda was there to ease his pains and remind him of all they had built together. When Zelda's eyes grew weak from years of teaching and reading by firelight, Jude would read to her in the evenings, his voice still strong and sure. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them gathered in the original cabin where it had all begun. The new generations marveled at how small it was, this space that had sheltered their grandparents through that first long winter. "How did you manage?" one grandchild asked. Jude and Zelda looked at each other and smiled, a lifetime of love and understanding passing between them in that glance. "Love makes any space big enough," Zelda said. "And any burden light enough to bear," Jude added, taking her hand. When Jude finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, Zelda mourned deeply but without regret. They had been given more than 50 wonderful years together, years filled with love and laughter and purpose. She kept the fire burning in his memory, tending it faithfully every day. Zelda lived 3 more years, teaching until the very end, surrounded by the family they had created together. On her last day, sitting by the fire in her favorite chair, she spoke to her gathered children about their father, about the man who had saved her life and given her everything she had never known she wanted. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Kind and strong and true. Every day with him was a gift, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, because those were the days when I learned what real partnership meant, what real love looked like." That night, Zelda passed quietly, a smile on her face, her hand reaching out as if to take another's hand. Her family liked to think that Jude had come for her, that they were together again at last. They buried her beside Jude on the mountain they had both loved, and at the funeral, their great-grandson stood up to speak. He told the story of how they had met, of a woman too cold to survive, and a man who had vowed to keep her warm. He spoke of promises kept and love that endured beyond death. "They showed us what it means to commit, to sacrifice, to love truly," he said. "Their legacy is not just the family they created, but the example they set. They proved that the best things in life come from choosing to care for someone else more than you care for yourself." The fire in the old cabin burned for 3 days and 3 nights after Zelda's death, tended by family members in shifts, a final tribute to the promise that had defined their grandparents' life together. And when it finally died down, they banked it carefully, preserving the coals, ready to build it up again when the next generation needed warmth and shelter. The cabin still stands today, maintained by the Zimmerman descendants as a reminder of where they came from. And every winter, when the snow falls deep on the Colorado mountains, someone from the family makes the pilgrimage up to light the fire, to keep it burning as Jude once promised Zelda he always would. The story of the mountain man and the woman who could not bear the cold became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. It reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with passion or grand gestures, but with one person simply refusing to let another person suffer, with the quiet determination to keep someone safe and warm through the darkest, coldest times. And so the fire burns on, generation after generation, a symbol of a promise made in desperate circumstances and kept through a lifetime of devotion. It burns as a reminder that love, real love, is not just about the easy moments but about the commitment to keep showing up, to keep caring, to keep the fire burning no matter how cold the world outside becomes. Jude and Zelda's love story proved that sometimes getting lost leads you exactly where you need to be, that sometimes the worst circumstances create the best opportunities, and that sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the person who makes your life worth living. Their legacy lives on in every descendant who chooses love over fear, commitment over convenience, and warmth over cold indifference. The mountain still stands, snow still falls, and fires still burn in the cabins of Westcliff. And somewhere in the whisper of the wind through the pines, in the crackle of logs in the hearth, in the warmth that spreads through a home on a winter's night, the spirit of Jude and Zelda's love endures, eternal as the mountains, constant as the seasons, warm as the fire that never went out.